Growing up, we're fed with dozens of limiting beliefs that, if not taken care, will affect us profoundly through our entire lives. At this point, you already know that. But there's usually a problem. Getting rid of them is a hard thing to do. And the reason why it's such a hard thing to do is when you're first starting out, you have no references to base yourself on. You don't know how successful people operate. Because respectfully, you probably have never spent time with successful people in the first place. Growing up, majority of us spend our time with our parents, our teachers, our friends, who usually come from a family with very similar economic backgrounds to our own. So what ends up happening is that these people just reinforce those already existing limiting beliefs that's inside of us. You know, I'll even tell you a little story about this. My first tattoo here, it says, "My cup runneth over." It's written in the Old Testament, and I actually got this tattoo when I was 16 years old. You know, I was definitely a very naughty teenager, and obviously with all areas of my life, I grew up very quickly. So I definitely don't recommend you go getting a tattoo at 16, but the reason I got this, "My cup runneth over," it basically means that I have more than I need. I'm overflowing, I'm abundant. And the reason I got this tattoo, and the reason it was very important to me as a constant reminder to myself, was growing up, my mom always used to tell me, take as much as you can because you never know when you're gonna get any more. And that was her truth. And I totally empathize with that truth. Because listen, when you are the youngest of 7 children growing up in the Soviet Union, that statement is true. You really don't know when you're gonna get any more. So if something's in front of you, take as much as you can. And this is what I'm saying. Beliefs can get passed down through your parents, even if they don't serve you. So between that and also a lot of the financial struggles that we had growing up, you know, me and her, my mom always used to tell me, take as much as you can because you don't know when you're gonna get any more. And that just didn't serve me. That was my attitude growing up. Even though I was still a young kid, I would always think like, how can I get the better end of this deal? Or if there's a certain amount of something, how can I get the most of it? Or even just down to small things. I would always overeat. Even if I was full, I would force myself to eat more because my mom's voice was always in my head. That belief system was always in my head. And one of the things I will give myself credit for was working through that limiting belief system. You know, I ended up getting the tattoo. Instead, I'm not saying you should get a tattoo, but the rest of my life, ever since I was 16 years old, I have been so abundant. Even when I had nothing, I acted so abundantly. I gave so much. I was so generous with the people around me, if they deserved it, obviously, and weren't just there for the ride. And it just broke this belief. So this is stuff that I've had to work through over the years, many things in my life. That's just one example. Now, getting back to you, again, you really can't address or get rid of those beliefs if these are the only beliefs that you know. You know, the way I like to explain it is this. The amount of colors that our eyes can see is actually very small compared to the amount of colors that's out there in the entire light spectrum. For example, there are a few birds that can actually see ultraviolet light, which obviously we can't see. And that means that they can see millions of colors that we don't even imagine exist. You know, if they were to look at the most colorful TV screens that exist today, you know, they'd probably think to themselves, what horribly unrealistic colors. But from our perspective, the 6K or 8K TV, it looks extremely photorealistic. And that's because we judge things for what we can see. And the same happens with our beliefs and our experiences. We all experience the world based on our own limiting realities that are based on the things that we know and we see. However, that's not the full reality because there are a lot of things that you don't know, or you don't get to see, or you don't get to experience. And that's why you might have dozens of limiting beliefs that you're not even aware of, because you're not even aware that different realities exist. And unfortunately, the average person has no idea on how different rich people think and approach things compared to broke people. Let me give you a very concrete example. Most people operate from a place of scarcity, especially when it comes to money, which also makes them very emotional towards money. They're always afraid that they won't have enough, or that the process of making money is always hard, miserable, and stressful, because that's what they've always experienced. Or the classic example of someone who operates from that mindset and just started a business and is afraid to charge higher prices because he thinks that everyone else has the same view on money that they have, and that if something costs more than $200, no one's gonna buy it because it's too expensive. All while at the same time, there's competitors selling the same product or service for 2 times, 5 times, 10 times the price. And this really all comes back to their limited reference towards money. Listen, I can tell you from firsthand experience, you'd be surprised how indifferent rich people are towards money. And by the way, that's usually why they make so much money in the first place, because they're not emotional about it. They're not afraid of charging more. They're not afraid of investing heavy amounts of money, knowing very well that they could lose it all. Now, the point I want to get to here is this. the only way to truly get rid of your limiting beliefs is by having more references. And that is observing how successful people specifically think, approach, and act on things, and what type of beliefs they hold compared to what you currently hold. And the only way to do that is by spending time with successful people. Now, obviously the problem is, where do you find those people? And how do you get them to spend time with you in the first place? Well, that's the question I asked myself when I was 13. You see, back then, I didn't know any successful people that I could spend time with to learn from and understand how they think and what beliefs they hold. So I found a solution to that: books. Back when I was 13, 14, 15, I would spend entire afternoons at Brixton Bookmongers in London, reading secondhand books they had there. And I used to literally just read the books there because I couldn't afford to buy more than 2 or 3 books a month. So I used to go there and just try to read as many books in an afternoon as possible. You know, I was reading so much that if you really thought about it, majority of my time was spent with extremely successful individuals. Not physically, but in the world of ideas, which according to Plato, as we mentioned in episode 2, is technically the real world anyways. Jokes aside, by doing that, I really started to share the same beliefs and worldviews that these successful people had. And by doing so, it really started to unwire all of the limiting beliefs towards money and success that the conditioning factory had deeply injected into my brain. I was essentially hacking my way into spending time with successful people who were completely inaccessible to me back then. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to read hundreds of books like I did growing up, but you do need to learn from people who